So, Overwatch is and has been infamous for many years due to several reasons, but one thing that's always stood out about it is its art style, which is, quite frankly, absolutely fantastic. It looks good to look at. A lot of this is reflected in VFX, because they're also very gameplay oriented, aside from a ton of visual clutter, especially when it comes to shields, with a lot of overlapping colors, eventually just obscuring what's behind it. In moderation, the gameplay effects are actually really readable. And the example we're going to dissect today is Zarya. Or more specifically, Zarya's Bubble, her shield. You can see that there is an orb. The intersection with the ground shows us that this is in fact a 3D sphere and not just a 2D card with a sphere picture on it that's always facing the camera. There's this red ring glow on the inside, and you can see that this is a single plane that is aligned to the global Z-axis, or the vertical axis. Also, when the bubble spawns, there are these hexagonal sprites that spawn around it just to add extra visual interest. All of these pieces, which comprise a single particle system that is connected to the root bone of the rig, that is the bone that actually moves around in world space, and everything else is attached to that. We can make this ourselves in Unreal Engine in a relatively reasonable amount of time. The first thing we're going to do with all of these different pieces is just assemble these from a texture that I have created. This is an example of a channel-packed texture where there is one texture in each one of the channels, so that's R, G, B, and A. First things first, we're going to name this Zarya underscore something. The first one we're going to start with is the hexagonal shape. We want this one to keep its color, so we're going to go from opaque to alpha composite, default lit to unlit. We can keep it one-sided since it's a card. And we're going to drag just the R into the emissive color. What we're effectively going to do here, just to make everything more polished, we're going to set this up as a texture that we can use over and over, since most of these behave much the same way. So here, depth fade. This will then give us our opacity. We're going for particle color, multiply the color by the texture for that, multiply the exact same thing by the particle alpha, so that now we can have it disappear and dissipate. Multiply the final emissive color result by opacity, and now we have our hexagonal shape. Duplicate this one, we're going to call this flare. Duplicate again, we're going to call this one ring, and duplicate it again. This one we're going to edit a little bit more. Right here we're going to add a subtract. So dynamic material parameter, change the first parameter to erode. This is from 0 to 1, set the default to 0 so it doesn't happen automatically, and then we're going to subtract this erosion from the opacity. Make sure this happens before it gets multiplied by the color. The only thing we're left to do is the orb. Two-sided, default lit to unlit, opaque to alpha composite. So now we're looking for something called a Fresnel, which we can then immediately plug into emissive color. And you can see we have this. This looks pretty good. We're going to add some extra pizzazz to this. We're going to add a depth fade to this. So we're going to go plug this in here. We're going to 1 minus this, so that this only happens where it intersects with the ground. From this, we are going to saturate. To get an idea of what this looks like, we can drag the orb here into the world and drag the Fresnel material onto it. Whenever it intersects with an object, it will glow. And change the fade distance to about 30% of what it originally was for a much cleaner example. Actually, let's rather go with 10%, switch this one back up to perhaps 0.05. What we're doing now is we're making sure that the inside of the sphere actually shows a slightly different variation of the procedural texturing that we've done as opposed to the front side. This way, the outer Fresnel on the front face will be significantly brighter than the Fresnel on the back face. We are doing this using a two-sided texturing material function, and we're only using the mask. Throwing this into a lerp with the brighter version going into B and the less version going into the A. And that gives us this result. All of the pieces are now set in place. Create empty system. We're going to call this Zarya underscore system. First order of business, we are going to expose a user parameter for the lifespan of this, since especially in games like this, patches roll out relatively often, and they often change the duration of abilities, specifically ones such as Zarya's Bubble, which has been a point of contention for some time. So we're adding a float, and we're naming this lifetime. The default lifetime, I think, we're going to make 3 seconds. So now from here, we can actually just drag user lifetime onto the lifetime of every single emitter to have it work the way we intend for it. Emitter state, set this to self, once, add a burst, spawn instantaneous. Everything in this is going to spawn as a burst. This will now spawn exactly once. We're going to keep all of these in a local space. They will remain on the CPU since we don't need a lot of particles. It's just going to be very few of them, and we keep it in local so that we can have it move with the model, and we can also have it scale as we see fit. And this will be aligned to the global z-axis. So what we do under particle spawn is sprite facing and alignment. The sprite will not be facing anything, but the sprite will be aligned to 1 on the blue, which is the z-axis. From here, we are just going to continue doing slightly more of these in different variations for the different elements in this particle system, and I'll be right back with a variation. We have our mesh in here as well. What we're going to do is we're going to scale the mesh size. Because we want this on all axes, we're going to switch the axes to vector from float and then float from curve. And then we've already done this for the rest, so we're just going to set the same thing to happen here. Until finally, we create a new emitter. This one's also completely empty. Sprite renderer, we're going to drag in the hex for this one. We're going to switch once again, emitter self-infinite once, add a burst instantaneous. We're going to switch this to about 100, and then under particle spawn, shape location. Now under initialize particles, these ones can be very different. We are going to go random range float, set them from 1 to 2 maximum. Sphere, we are going to distribute these along only the surface of the sphere. To set these to spawn in a very specific location, we have changed the distribution from random to direct, the U position to random range float between 0 and 1, and in the V position, we can now clamp between these so that they spawn in a sort of radius just around it. We are now going to change the radius of the sphere itself until it's about here, which is 250, scale color, copy this, particle update. Everything here is in local space, with the exception of course, these hex shapes. What we're now going to do is switch the alignment to velocity aligned, so that they behave a little bit more similar. And now scale the sprite size. We are going to have this as a non-uniform curve, where it scales correctly on the Y, but gets smaller on the X. And now with all of this done, our effect should be functionally complete. We go into our third-person system. We are going to add a keyboard event. Whenever we press the left shift, we are going to spawn system attached. And with that, all we have done is rescaled everything post blueprint attachment. Under the third-person character, what we have done is we've gotten a reference to the mesh by simply dragging in the character mesh, connecting that to component of a spawn system attached. We have transformed this here. We've moved it up globally on the z-axis by 90. Everything else is fine. We've turned on auto destroy just for cleanup, save, compile, and now we have a working version of Zarya's Bubble from the hit, completely not controversial at all game, Overwatch. I hope you enjoyed this. If you use this or make something similar to this, please do let me know on Twitter. That would be SPRWTV, Sparrow, and I'll see you next time.